Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Legal 500 webinar this morning. Our title today is A Guide to M&A in Greece, Market Opportunities and Challenges in 2022. Now, this is an exciting time to be having this conversation because in a lot of ways, M&A is a measure of confidence. In today's ever-shifting landscape, that means that acquirers are not just solely motivated by cost mitigation, but also by new opportunities. And those opportunities in certain landscapes, such as the North American and European markets, take the form of billion-dollar deals, which happen to be the main drivers behind a recent surge in M&A. And this has also propelled the total number of M&A transactions to near record highs globally. Opportunities such as ESG policies also facilitate deals in emerging sectors such as renewables, whilst political stability and the by and large successful rollouts of vaccines around the world mean that an end to the pandemic could finally be within sight. Now, if M&A is a measure of confidence, that confidence seems to be quite high at the moment indeed. Today, we take a look at the extent to which recent developments, the emergence of new variants notwithstanding, shape our expectations in the field of M&A in Greece's unique set of circumstances for the upcoming year. We are joined by a panel of experts who I am sure would be in a position to help expand our knowledge on this. This is just a rudimentary opinion that we opened up. And on the private practice side of things, we're joined by Pavlos Masouros. Pavlos is admitted to practice before the Supreme Court and is the managing partner of Masouros and Partners. He has advised foreign and domestic corporate clients, as well as the Hellenic and foreign governments and state-owned organizations on dozens of business combinations, including some of the largest deals in value with a Greek element, and is continuously engaged in cross-border corporate and M&A dispute resolution cases before international arbitral tribunals, Greek and foreign state courts. Pavlos has received several professional awards and references in legal directories and the press for his corporate law expertise. He's the author of many books and articles on corporate law, corporate litigation, corporate governance, and law and economics, and he is frequently sought after commentator on current developments in Greece and beyond, and his views have appeared in the international media, such as the Washington Post, Slate, Reuters Opinion, American Lawyer, etc. Pavlos, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Good morning to you and looking forward to your presentation.
Good morning, Chris. A pleasure to be with you as well.
We are also joined on the in-house side by Yota Krasakopoulou. Yota is General Counsel and Director of Legal and Corporate Affairs at Attica Holdings. She has a vast understanding of the company's operations and the wider shipping industry. Prior to being appointed to her current role, Yota impressed Attica's senior management on a number of projects, including a successful multi-jurisdictional litigation in Finland. In this case, she worked on proceedings involving German seafarers over the sale of Greek vessels. Today, she advises Attica's CEO and board of directors on legal, political, and governmental relations, as well as the management of regulatory and political risk, providing input in strategic business decisions and initiatives in the process. Yota, just want to welcome you as well. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Fantastic. We're also joined by Argyris Ikonomou, one of the most knowledgeable, experienced, and highly respected lawyers in Greece. Argyris has operated at the upper echelons of both private practice and in internal legal roles over the course of his career. His highly successful 16-year tenure at Strategis and Partners Law Office, saw him rise to the rank of managing partner at the firm on the back of excellent performance in a range of fields, especially corporate and competition law and commercial litigation. Argyris began the current chapter of his career in 2005 when he joined state-controlled electricity producer Public Power Corporation as general counsel. He takes on ultimate responsibility for legal matters at this strategically important Greek organization. Argyris, good morning and welcome. We're privileged to have you this morning.
Thank you very much for inviting me. The pleasure and the privilege is all mine.
And last but not least, we're also joined by Catherine Caranicola. Catherine is the Chief Legal Officer at the YNV Group and a Supreme Court registered lawyer with more than 18 years of experience as a practicing attorney focusing on commercial, corporate, privacy, and IP and IT laws. Catherine has worked as a senior associate in prominent Greek legal law firms and has served as a general legal counsel to major global technology companies, including Softomotive, a company that got acquired by Microsoft in 2020. As general legal counsel and VP of operations to Softomotive, Catherine drove end-to-end the M&A process with Microsoft to ensure this more integration. Catherine, good morning to you as well.
Good morning to you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, everyone.
Fantastic. So right before we jump into Pavlos's presentation, I would just like to invite the audience to jump in with any questions that you might have. Interactivity is something that we value very much, and we find that it always pushes conversation further and brings insights that we might not have otherwise have had from our experts. So please feel free to chip in using the chat function, and we will get to as many of those as we can. Now, without any further delay, I will pass on to Pavlos for presentation.
So thank you, Chris, for the concise introduction. And let me extend a warm welcome to everyone who is attending this webinar. And thank you for taking the opportunity to be with us this morning. So I'm going to start off in the way that we started last year. I'm going to put 2021 in review, and we're going to see what's going on the global front, and then turn to the Greek specificities of the M&A market. So it seems that 2021 is on track to amount to $6 trillion in M&A activity. So that's going to be a record year, the highest annual volume of M&A on record in history. There is very many reasons why this is the case, and I'm gonna cite just a few. So it seems that there's pent-up demand for deals following the COVID lockdown. So 2020 was very much a tale of two stories. I mean, there was an M&A trend in the beginning, there was lowered activity around in the middle, and then a number of deals were on track to close by the end of the year, but they didn't because many economies, they went on lockdown again. So in a way, 2021 is what we did not see in 2020. On the other hand, a good number of governments has launched economic stimulus programs. So that helps buyers in effecting acquisitions. And there's also a lot of a great reserve, a great surplus of corporate cash. So strategic buyers are in a position to effect acquisitions on the basis of a surplus of corporate cash. And there's a lot of dry powder on the private equity side. The quarter that just closed, because we don't yet have the numbers for the fourth quarter, but the third quarter of 2021 seems to be, it is the largest single quarter volume since 2007, which was a record year for M&A. What we can notice is that the third quarter, the latest quarter for which we have the figures, was not so much a quarter where special purpose acquisition vehicles played a leading role in M&A, because the number of SPAC, as we say, transactions has been on decline since the beginning of the year. So it's not so much special purpose acquisition vehicles playing a role here, but an overall heightened M&A volume is a trend. In terms of cross-border M&A, it's also an interesting year because we see that these amount to 46% of the global M&A volume. So this is interesting because the average proportion of cross-border M&A during the past decade has been 36%. So that's 10% over the average. And what's interesting is that we tend to think that cross-border M&A means advisors flying over, principals, executives flying over to meet the counterparties, negotiate the deal and close the deal. A good part of 2020, no cross-border deals could be done because people were not able to fly in between countries to close the deals. So if during 2021, we see cross-border deals being on the rise, it means that everyone who in the M&A industry who plays a role has now become familiar with virtual closing, with over video conference negotiations, etc. So things that were previously unthinkable in relation to cross-border deals. So that's definitely something, I mean, I take this as a proxy that people are now getting used to close deals on a virtual mode. There are many outside the industry which see the numbers, see the figures, and they believe that it is very much because of many companies of many target companies being distressed and being taken over as a bargain. Well, this graph shows this is not the case. The reason why we see heightened M&A activity in 2021 is not because we have many companies being in distress. Being in distress means that a distressed deal means a deal where the target is undergoing a bankruptcy sale, or has recently had a loan modification, or has recently exchanged debt with equity on the basis of an exchange offer. So this is what we mean in M&A jargon by saying distressed M&A. So it's not the reason why we see heightened M&A activity. True, many companies have suffered due to the pandemic, but there is appetite for M&A that goes beyond the fact that there are just too many distressed companies up for grabs out there. In terms of how M&A activity is broken down by region, United States remains a champion, but this is no wonder, of course. We lawyers, M&A lawyers, we all know that the US has traditionally a great amount of M&A activity. It has always been the case. We know that through case law, which is definitely abundant in the US in relation to M&A as opposed to Europe. But it seems that Europe is not lagging behind. And while a good part of that 30% you see in the pie is due to domestic deals taking place in Europe, there have been quite some landmark cross-border European deals. Turning now to Greece. It's always difficult to collect data in relation to the Greek M&A activity, but it has become easier over time. So 2020, we had 59 deals for a total amount of 4 billion euros. 2021, it seems it's going to be double that number. So we have 78 deals, but that includes pending, completed, and proposed deals. And if everything closes by the end of the year, the total figure will be close to 10 billion euros. So that's double, more than double the amount of 2020. We have 48 deals that have so far been completed. And there are 29 deals that are in the pipeline. And what I mean in the pipeline, I mean that signing execution of the transaction documents has been done, and we're waiting for closing to take place. And then in terms of the industry wherein Greek M&As take place, there are some interesting data here. I mean, the two industries that see the most of M&A activity are consumer products and industrial. And then you have financial M&A. And I would like to make a comment here in that for too many years in Greece, the only M&A we got was financial M&A, and meaning banks were consolidating on the basis of the fact that some banking institutions were failing, and it was a mandate that they had to be taken over by other banking institutions. So these were M&A deals. The courtship thereof was done by Bank of Greece or by the government. So it's a first. 2021 is a first in many years in that we see a decline in financial M&A activity. And it seems that, let's say, more healthy M&A activity has surpassed in other sectors banking M&A. Then utilities amount for around 700 million. And what's interesting is that we are starting to see many deals in the technology sector. And here, while the value is definitely not as high as in other sectors of the economy, there is a great volume of deals taking place in the technology sector. So these are small deals, anywhere from 1.5 million to 15 million. So very small to small deals. But there is a great number thereof. And it's something that we did not see in the past decade at all in Greece. A good number of these companies that are being taken over by mostly foreign buyers in the technology sector are companies that are startups, companies that have not been in business for more than 5 to 7 years. And this is a proxy that there is a number of companies in Greece that have been founded by young people who are very outward thinking and can reach out to foreign buyers, foreign strategic buyers, and be the target of interesting M&A. So these are companies that have developed the software or some other intellectual property product, and therefore are interesting for companies outside Greece who want to consolidate their business and acquire some IP, get their hands on IP that they cannot develop themselves at the same cost. In terms of deal terms, there are some interesting trends that we witnessed during 2021. The first is that parties are much more sophisticated when it comes to drafting material adverse change or material adverse effect clauses. And that's definitely a byproduct of the pandemic. There were too many deals that were canceled during 2020 because the buyer was able to rely on the material adverse change clause in order to walk away from the deal, in order to walk away before closing. So now parties are much more conscious, and they spend a lot more time on drafting the MAC clause. So that's definitely a trend that we've noticed in nearly all the deals we handled during 2021. Then another interesting trend, which we did not witness before, is that buyers, they now seek deal protection devices to be installed in SPAs. So they're fighting for termination fees, breakup fees, etc. The reason why this is the case is that for the first time in many years, those Greek companies that were the target of a takeover, they quite often did not just have one candidate buyer across the table. There was either previously, or there were rumors that subsequently an alternative bidder would show up. So if that bidder made a superior offer, it could be the case that the seller would choose to terminate the agreement with the original buyer and go with the one who subsequently filed the superior offer. So that shows that Greek target companies have become quite attractive to foreign buyers, and therefore they generate interest in more than one buyers each time. A byproduct of this trend is that we were instructed to draft our first SPA that included a fiduciary out. A fiduciary out is something that we Greek lawyers have traditionally not been very familiar with. It's a trend that we see. It's something that a clause that we see mostly in US M&As, where the seller's board of directors reserves the discretion to terminate a signed deal before closing if a superior offer is received by an alternative bidder. So this is the result of pressure by shareholder activists that take positions now in Greek companies, and they become more and more vocal about what they need. So in the face of a potentially superior offer by an alternative bidder, the seller's board of directors is required to terminate a signed deal that it already has with a buyer in order to let the shareholders realize a greater profit. On the seller side now, in nearly all the smaller deals that we advised on, mainly those in the technology sector, earnout structures were abundant. So sellers, they were disposing of their shares in the company, in most times by 70 to 90%, but they remained on the management of the company, and they would be receiving a part of the purchase price over time if the company performed well. So this is something that we witnessed, particularly in smaller deals. And those smaller deals were mainly affected within the so-called technology sector. In terms of what is the currency for Greek deals, cash is king. That this is, of course, no wonder. Private equities have a lot of dry powder, as we said in the beginning. Strategic buyers have a surplus of corporate cash. But we did also see that in certain instances, buyers were willing to assume debt of the target, and that also acted as currency for a few deals, especially larger ones. In terms of the disputes, M&A litigation, arbitration, 2021 was not so interesting as 2020 was. We did not have a lot of litigation. We had some controversies arising, but not so much full-blown M&A arbitration. The parties struggled over purchase price adjustment mechanisms. So quite often when the closing accounts were presented by sellers, buyers would dispute the accuracy of the data. So that would either block or most of the times delay closing a bit. And the parties would resort to independent expert determination in order to resolve the controversy. So that's not, again, arbitration or litigation, but it is something that we witnessed quite a few times in the deals we handled during 2021. Buyers very much liked to set off their obligation to pay earnouts against the claims they thought they had on the basis of misrepresentation made by sellers. So there was, again, controversy and small disputes that were eventually settled on the basis of this attempted set off by buyers. And there was a lot of threatened litigation surrounding M&A by shareholders. Again, it seems that shareholder activists now have grease on their rudder. And a good number of our clients were threatened with litigation by shareholder activists on the basis of claims that they're breaching their fiduciary duties by not looking at a deal or by not properly negotiating a deal that has come to them. And of course, something that is a positive development is that we no longer have disputes over whether material adverse change or material adverse effect has hit the target. This is something that was very much in trend during 2020. We're still busy with litigation from 2020 in relation to this issue, but we witnessed no new litigation or arbitration arising on the basis of this. So I'm hoping that this brief presentation is sort of setting the framework for the interesting discussion that I am looking forward to in a few minutes. And I would like to just thank you all for taking the time to attend this. So Chris, I now turn to you.
Thank you very much, Pavlos, for that very illuminating presentation. It's always a privilege listening to someone who is at the forefront of developments and can very concisely sum up what is going on. We're also privileged to have 3 more panelists whose opinion we would love. Before we move on to other topics, I would just like to open this up to our panelists and just see if there's anything that they would like to add or any comments they would like to make at this point before we move on. I know that Pavlos made a very interesting comment, for example, on the tech M&A deals that seem to be happening at the moment. That it seems to be a relatively new variable in the game. So one of the reasons I'm very excited for this webinar is that we have confluence of opinions. We have experts from different fields, such as tech, shipping, etc. So if there's any comments, now would be the time before we...
Perhaps I would make a comment if that's okay with you.
Please do.
I cannot but fully agree on the assumptions of Pablo Masouros of what he said. My only addition would be that given the fact that there are a couple of sectors of Greece's economy which are being transformed drastically. One of them is the informatics business in general. You see, Greece's economy has been at least the last 20 or 30 years driven by consumption. So you would expect to see changes, even transformations in the business activities which were related to the consumption. Now we're in a different phase, and given the fact that informatics have been mostly due to government initiatives, been at the center of attention, my forecast would be to see more M&As in technology industry, at least as compared to the past. So I would see that trend, which Pablos very accurately pointed out as a new trend. I would expect in the near future to be further enhanced.
Chris, if I also may comment on Pavlos's incredibly interesting presentation. I always find Pavlos's presentation amazing because they're short and they give us a very, very clear outline of what is happening in the market. And especially from a place like where I stand, it's very difficult to see the full picture of where the market goes, of course, internationally, but also in Greece. And Pavlos's presentation always gives us in a very, very short and clear way what is happening. And I have to say that I agree. By listening to him, I was thinking my own thoughts about where our industries goes. And it seems that these are the trends. I was especially interested to hear that globally distressed M&As are not the trend, which is something that one might have expected to hear coming out from a year, maybe 2 years of a severe crisis due to COVID. And what I just want to point out is that in Greece, we are also coming from quite a few years of economic distress due to our financial problems, let's say, in previous years. But it seems that M&As related to these issues, distress M&As, are not the trend. And I'm actually very, very happy to hear this, because it seems that people are more inclined to develop and grow rather than trying to sort out problems from the past. Overall, I thought it was an amazing presentation. Thank you, Pavlo.
And if I may build on to that, Jota and Pavlos, and it's some additional stats with regards to that and where the trend of the market is going, particularly in Greece. I was reading a recent EY report that said that more than 3/4 of Greek executives are planning deals, and they're considering actually cross-border transactions within EU and the UK. 86% of those Greek executives expect that they will need to redefine their role as a result of the pandemic, and in order to ensure that they have clarity on the ecosystem that they're operating in. And another 86% is even partnering with competitors to gain additional advantage from their current offerings. So it does seem that, particularly as regards Greek technology companies, whereas in the past they were either non-existent or they were being disturbed by global market trends, they are now starting to become the disruptors themselves within the global markets. And that's obviously a very good development for the Greek ecosystem, the Greek technology ecosystem, with Greek tech companies booming, and a lot of them being a target for acquisition by tech giants, such as in my case, I was with Softomotive. Microsoft got to acquire a Greek company. So all of that is a very, very positive indication as to where the Greek market is going.
Fantastic. That's all great to hear. As you can see, Pavlos, your presentation stimulated a flurry of activity already. So that is great to see. And we also have an influx of questions to which we can get. We already touched on distressed M&As. There's a question here from an M&A council from Brussels mentioning distressed M&As with regards to those and anti-embarrassment clauses. Is that something that you have seen in Greece, Pavlos? I don't know if you've already touched on it.
Yeah, well, anti-embarrassment clauses is something that is common with Greek privatizations. So the Hellenic Republic Asset Development Fund, which is the vehicle where under all privatizations are happening, commonly, I mean, it's a standard, includes an anti-embarrassment clause in all the deals it is setting out. So if within, let's say, next 3 years, buyer is able to sell out the acquired interest in the target at a price which is greater than the one it purchased it from the Hellenic Republic Asset Development Fund, a percentage of the margin between the two purchase prices should be paid out to the fund. So it's something that I've noticed in relation to privatizations. It's a standard clause, not so in relation to smaller deals.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And finally, before we move on, Pavlos, I would just like to ask one final question with regards to, seeing as we have you here and you are in a very insider position within the industry, I was just wondering if there are any specific issues that come up most frequently in your experience when speaking to industry professionals and GCs.
Well, definitely the trend that we've noticed in 2021 was that GCs and their clients on both sides of a deal, they required speed. So something which was not common in relation to Greek deals. And the reason why it was not common is that the bulk of Greek deals always related to companies that are not listed on the stock exchange. When you're working on a public deal, when the deal is related to a target whose shares are listed on the stock exchange, we all know that if negotiations drag for a while, this will affect the stock price. So everything has to be done fast. When private deals were the case, that was not an issue. Speed was not an issue. And general counsels, especially those that in-house counsels that were advising smaller corporations, they had also no prior exposure to M&A. So they needed time to learn what is at stake. But now we've noticed that everyone is taking speed for granted. Everyone is demanding speed, not less because, as I said during the presentation, a good number of target companies now have alternative bidders waiting in the wings. So that's an issue that we definitely encountered during 2021.
Great. Speed, many mention of speed brings us very nicely to the technology sector, which famously moves very, very quickly, and to our panelist today, Catherine. So bringing in the factor of speed, Catherine, can you share some statistics on M&A for the tech sector for this financial year? And where do you believe the market is generally headed with those?
So, Chris, thank you for the question. I think that Pavlos did an amazing job in presenting the stats for both at a global level and tech Greek level. So I wouldn't spend any additional time or provide any additional inputs with regards to that. Now, as regards the tech market direction, I would say that, and we've discussed this already in a bit, M&A transactions in 2021 obviously focused on accelerating the adoption of technology in day-to-day company operations so as to address mainly COVID-19 related drawbacks. The tech market is moving too fast. And in my experience and what I've seen, tech companies would rather acquire a company to build new capabilities, reshape their businesses, and maintain and retain market talent instead of growing organically. And I would think that the same applies to Greek businesses as well. And as Yota says, after almost 10 years of financial crisis in Greece, companies do see the pandemic as an opportunity to leap ahead with investments both in the EU and become themselves disruptors, as we've said. So there is a realization that Greek businesses need to transform their operating models, and innovation, operational and productional efficiency, as well as better serving their customers, seems to be the epicenter of their M&A strategy. And this is what likely will drive the trends going forward with regards to that.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for that. We do seem to have more questions from the audience, namely mentioning new developments in the field of ESG, which, as you're all aware, is one of the emerging trends today. And I was wondering if you could each share your thoughts on emerging trends in ESG and how those would affect M&A in the coming year.
Chris, I couldn't hear you very well.
Apologies for that. I was touching on a question from the audience regarding ESG, and I was wondering if our panelists could share some thoughts on ESG and if those are taken more seriously.
I can make a couple of comments on that.
Please do.
Well, as you might know, PPC, the company which I'm the chief legal officer, is for a number of years now, at least a couple, being into what is arguably the most drastic and fast corporate transformation in Greece ever. The market seems that it responds very positively in that trend, and that helped us in being more than expected successful in a couple of transactions. The one is actually a couple of bond issues amounting to almost 750 million euros. And the second was the increase of the share capital of PPC, which is not only an increase, but also another transformation in the sense that the Hellenic Republic now is under 51% of the share capital of PPC, which accumulated 1.35 billion euros. So the next question is, where do we spend this money? Okay, which to me is the most difficult of the matters. Now, in terms of the experience that we have accrued as a result of the transactions that have been already completed, Well, I will tell you, quote unquote, what a colleague of ours who is very much involved in transactions like this in Greece the last number of years, he told me, I cannot reveal his name, he told me that, look at Giris, the money exists and everybody seems to be crazy in buying whatever is Greek. The issue now is not the money. The issue is corporate governance. And he was perfectly right, because the issues which arose as of major interest for shareholders, for investors in general, both lenders and shareholders, during both these transactions were very much related to corporate governance. Now, what we mean by corporate governance is another thing, because corporate governance has a number of meanings. The issue behind that is that it is a universal language. So you will have to convert practices and structures which might exist within your organization in a way that they will be acknowledged and evaluated as good or even best practices in terms of corporate governance by the universal financial community. This is something that some of us fail to understand, and understand or rather sooner than later, and adopt what exists in a way that could be acknowledgeable as such by the community, by the investors community. This is not item number one. Item number two is that we have been moving very, very fast in what is called now ESG. And I would like also to mention the initiative which is called TCFD, Task Force in Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, something which Michael Bloomberg has been favoring and supporting for a number of years. Because, okay, the word might be disclosure, but obviously you will have to disclose something which exists and operates. And not only operates, but operates efficiently. So my forecast is that within the next couple of 3 years at most of the companies will have to also introduce, besides ESG practices and policies, structures and operations and functions which will be addressing the TCFD requirement. Now, this creates a number of problems, including the cost problem, because these are rather expensive and luxurious procedures to adopt. And it seems that we will have to, at least sometime, address the issue, what would be the best practice on the one hand, but not extremely expensive on the other hand. Because it's not only the matter of cost, but also the matter of inflexible operation with the committees of X, Y, Z nature, which might be intervening in the executive branch of a corporation and so on. So my major point, and I will refrain to that, is that ESG is a certainty, is a reality. We cannot avoid it, even if we would like to. But it's not only ESG which comes. There is a second wave which is coming, which is related to TCFD, which is something anybody can understand. Of course, causal practices, and a lot of things which my feeling is that we can, right now, we cannot really anticipate what will be the reality in a couple of 3 years from now. Now, it's not only an experience on this side of the table, but it is also something which will be, at least for me, on the other side of the table. As an investor, PPC being an investor, I will be looking from my own, because I'm the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Governance General Director of PPC. So from my perspective, I will also be looking at companies which will be the targets of M&As within the PPC's now business plan, to have adopted or are ready to adopt such practices. Because we will not only have to consolidate, but we will also have to address expectations of our own investors. So the trend will be deepening, at least in my understanding. And of course, because we have also announced that who will be interested in M&A's activities in the greater area where Greece is. This is a region of the globe which is a little bit behind than Western Europe and North America in terms of corporate governance, compliance, risk management, and whatever is related to this notion in general is a little bit behind the rest of the world, the rest of the Western world.
And further to that, if I may add in, when we particularly talk about Greek targets and Greek technology targets, we're talking about small startups. They do not have the infrastructure in place to be able to implement all those ECG programs, which, as Argyris very correctly said, they're very expensive to implement, and they do need resources. Now, when we
and they are not listed, of course.
Exactly. So by design, they do not need to have those policies in place. So while it is an expectation, particularly for big corporates when they're buying a small target company, the reality of the situation is that the infrastructure that these companies have is very far away from those requirements.
And Chris, if I may just add up to what Catherine and Argyris very well put, and I completely agree with them with everything they said. Further to governance issues that are very, very important, Argyris put it in an excellent manner. It's also the other two parts, the environment and the social in the ECG criteria. And what I can say, at least for my sector, which is the transport sector, the tourism sector, sectors that are quite heavy on the environment, if I may say. So this creates an extra push for these companies to adopt measures that show their sensitivity and show actually measurable results that policies and actions can bring to the betterment of our performance, because unfortunately we cannot anymore perform without this criteria in mind. And this is related to M&A tactics, or maybe this to acquiring funding, where the ESG criteria are incredibly important these days. And in the end of the day, we will have to show measurable results, what we are actually doing for the environment, for social reasons, and of course, when it comes to governance and transparency and so forth.
Yeah, well, from a practical perspective, and I fully agree with all other panelists that this has become a major consideration, and people in the audience have very rightfully raised this issue. Is what we now get is instructions by clients that our red flag legal due diligence report should feature a section that carries the heading ESG. And then you also need to translate the findings thereof into reps and warranties that find their way into the SPA. So something which was not, of course, many issues that now belong to what is known as ESG, they were due diligence before on the employment section of the due diligence, the environmental section of the due diligence. But now it seems that this is becoming an independent concern of buyers, particularly those who are listed. So for instance, we recently had the deal where a Canadian company, a Canadian group is considering buying out a Greek target, and they are insisting on us producing part of the due diligence on ESG factors. And it's something that culturally, the bulk of small and medium-sized Greek enterprises are not yet very familiar with. Of course, Greek legislation is at par with European legislation for sure. So all the directives have been transposed, etc. So all the practices that are observed in the workplace, etc., they are Western standard, but there is no, let's say, separate consciousness on the part of Greek targets, small Greek targets, that this should be dealt with by an officer within the company separately, independently, and it is an issue that you have to take care of if you want to be attractive to foreign buyers.
Fantastic. It really is great having all panelists being able to contribute to these matters. So thank you all very much for this.
Can I just say something which now it intrigues me? It's not. It's what actually Pavlos Masouras said about the expectations of general counsel. It's not only that our colleagues who will be working on M&As would have to be fast. They would have also to be good and cheap.
Okay. Point taken.
That is always true. We also have more questions from our audience that seem to be following this conversation. To the in-house counsel, what do you look for from law firms that you work with when it comes to advising on an M&A matter? And I suppose this could also extend to Pavlos from the private practice side, and we would be very curious to hear your thoughts on it.
So I could take a stab at this, Chris, if I may. I was working very, very closely as general legal counsel to Softomotive with the external legal counsels that I had selected for the purposes of the transaction. What I found was critical, obviously, other than the cost and the speed of response, they need to establish a very close relationship with the business at that point in time. They need to understand the business, they need to speak the language of the business, and they need to be able to understand all the material findings of the due diligence in order to be able to accurately reflect those in the reps and warranties into the SPA. Having just an external legal counsel for the purposes of negotiating an SPA without having the context of the business, the specificities of the business, and the things that the business wants to safeguard as a result of the transaction is not something workable. So it's both up to the general legal counsel of the company, the stakeholders of the company, and the external legal counsels to go through this process hand in hand, really, because that's the only way that you can secure a successful outcome for all the parties concerned.
And if I may build on what Catherine said, very, very well put, Catherine, it is very important for the external counsels to know well the business, to understand. And this is a challenge for somebody coming outside from the business, because in a very, very short and limited time, they need to understand everything that we have spent years and years realizing and building. So the way that the external counsel is able to adopt and adapt is actually crucial. And I may add one more thing to this, is the ability of the external counsel to provide advice that is easy for the people in the business to understand. So to be a little bit away from, let's say, a pure legalistic way of speaking, and try to explain in very simple language what are the odds, what are the challenges, what are the ways forward, in simple, accurate, and short manner. And again, in order to do that, the external counsel will have to be able to understand the culture, the business, the specificities of that.
One addition on my side, if I may, not only for all the reasons which Jota and Catherine mentioned, but also on the reason of which I'm very sensitive, which is the loyalty to the company. I do not really like to work together with the law firms who might be working with us today or yesterday and work with a competitor of ours before that or after that. I'm looking always to establish long-term relations and relations of confidence. This is the word that we started our session, and trust, which also include the element of loyalty in a way, in a manner of speaking, of external counsels to us. This is crucial to me. So one of the issues which also lead to the result which mentioned before, to an outside counsel knowing better than others the particulars of a company, its objective, its strategic objective, which are not revealed to anybody. Okay. This is why I'm always trying to establish long-term business relationships with people whom I have selected also on the grounds of confidence and trust, not only on grounds of competence.
This seems to tie in very nicely with our experience of the Legal 500, whereby the role of the General Counsel seems to be somewhat in most people's consciousness a little bit underestimated. I believe it's absolutely central that they communicate efficiently, and it seems like you're reinforcing that message of the centrality, and being good communicators can absolutely facilitate these matters, which is really great to see. And it's great to see in practice, frankly, from all panelists today. So thank you. Now, these conversations do not, of course, take place in a vacuum, and there are ongoing developments around the world, matters to take into account, such as the ongoing pandemic. I was wondering if I could put to you the question of the implication of COVID-related restrictions on corporate decision-making. And maybe Jota might be a suitable person to answer that. And I will also invite any thoughts that anyone else might have. Please feel free to chip in.
Thank you, Chris. Indeed, my industry, as we briefly mentioned before, has been hit quite hard by COVID. Again, the areas where we operate is, of course, transport, and this is transport of passengers, which was severely hit by the measures because of COVID, of course, and then again, the wider industry of tourism. You all know very well that this is the sector that actually boosts the Greek economy. We all speak about tourism being the heavy industry of our country and so forth. It's a little bit of a cliche, but it is true that Greece's economy is very, very dependent on tourism and tourism-related activities. And COVID was a real hit for all the companies and the sectors involved in tourism, because when we speak about tourism, it is, of course, transport, it is hotel industry, it is travel, it is so many different activities. And what we are seeing now in the, let's say, in the era where hopefully we get away from the severe impact of COVID, is efforts by companies in the tourism industry to grow. And this will happen either through mergers or perhaps acquisitions of complementary activities. What is the discussion these days is how companies can grow by acquiring different businesses, let's say, that complement their core business in a way that they can create perhaps synergies. Perhaps again, even because Greece is not, again, the tourism sector is mainly an small and medium-sized businesses environment. We see also different forms of cooperation. So maybe it's not through acquisitions, but maybe of more strategic cooperations between companies of either the same core activity or complementary core activity in a way to form packages for the consumer that they can profit because, again, of the synergies and that may be created. So I think this is what is in the mind of BODs at this moment, how they can expand in any manner, either vertically or horizontally, and at the more free or more strict, let's say, forms of cooperation as a merger may be.
Great, thank you very much, Jota, for that. If anyone has anything to add, please feel free. Otherwise, we can move forward with some of our questions. One of those interesting developments, I believe, Pavlos, I believe you might agree, is the recently enacted legislation in Greece, which seems to incentivize small and medium businesses to merge to ensure financing from the recovery fund. And this also is a question from our audience. Going forward, would you say that M&As will be accelerated thanks to this legislation? Or what are your thoughts on this? Does it have the intended effect?
Well, generally, I grew up learning by my teachers at university that whatever we corporate M&A lawyers do, what counts is what tax lawyers advise on. So if there are tax incentives set out in relation to M&A, this will definitely eventually be a critical factor in what lies ahead. At the moment, as you said, indeed, there is a bill in discussion which is setting out tax incentives for small and medium-sized enterprises in Greece to consolidate. I think the rules are twofold. One is that those businesses that will be the subject of a takeover, both on the acquiring side and on the acquired side, will, for 3 years, I believe, see a discount of 30% on the taxable income base. And then the cash that a company spends on taking over another company will qualify as a fully deductible amount for the purposes of taxation. So these are definitely going to result in heightened M&A activity, but I do not expect this will affect the trends that we see in relation to large corporations. So this will definitely be something that will incentivize small or very small companies to join forces. So we'll see a number of business combinations at the very small scale. We'll unavoidably see some business combinations on the so-called mid-market. But large corporations, large Greek corporates, they operate on the basis of a different agenda. I'm not saying that taxation is completely irrelevant to them, absolutely not, but definitely the incentives that are there for business combinations, they are independent to those developments on the tax front. So we are expecting heightened M&A activity in 2022. Both for the reason that you quoted, those legislative changes in relation to taxation laws, but also because there is a trend. The Greek brand has become better, and there is a trend among private equity buyers and strategic buyers abroad to engage in takeovers in Greece.
I want to add something on that, if that's okay.
Yes.
Now, the policy of the Hellenic government has been structured as follows. We are facing a shift from what was subsidies to the recent past to what Pavlos just described, tax deductions policies. Now, it seems that there is an up threshold to that. It's I believe it is 25% of the investment. But on a second reading of the matter, this 25% can be reached also for large investments, because there was a differentiation there, if those investments are to be made through absorption of EU funds. Now, this might seem odd at the beginning, but it's not odd, because this is a policy which is targeting a better absorption of EU funds, which was something which we were never in a position to achieve in the past. Part of the reason why we were never, as a country, we were never in a position to absorb I mean, even 80% of the EU funds is because not only private sector corporations, but also public sector entities were not responding to whatever is required by the European Union, also in terms of environmental and social issues which had to be addressed. Now, look how now things are developed. In order to absorb these EU funds and recuperate the maximum of the tax deduction incentives, you will have also to perform corporate governance policies and structures, which to me is very, very interesting as a project.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, both, for contributing your input on this. It seems like a lot of the questions today, a lot of the interest seems to be mirroring some of the heightened activity in M&A in the tech sector. Catherine, this might be a good opportunity to turn to you and ask whether, looking forward into 2022, you foresee room for tech M&A growth. And how do you view, we've already touched on the role of GCs, but within that, but if you have something to add, we would be very interested to hear your insights on it.
Sure. So, Chris, on a global level, I think that most tech executives are optimistic that revenues, profits, and growth will continue in FY22. Organic growth could be difficult due to the macroeconomic conditions that we're facing due to COVID. But 51% of the tech execs say that they plan to pursue M&A activity in FY22 to sustain growth. In Greece, I think the environment is a little bit different, not from the perspective of companies being targets to an acquisition, but rather Greek companies acquiring other companies. I think that while Greek executives seem more confident in their performance during the pandemic, and admittedly, they did an outstanding job in being responsive and trying to change the way that they operated despite all those difficulties that they had. I was reading again a report from PwC that says that just 30% of Greek companies intend to pursue an M&A activity in the next 12 months, and they clearly expect most of their growth to come within. I think that this is something that has to do with the fact that, Greek execs are still cautious. We do not know yet how this whole situation with COVID will play out. We haven't seen yet the full microeconomic environment and the exposure of the companies. I think that they're assessing their position right now. But obviously, we are in the change, and hopefully the next 12 months, we will see additional activity coming from Greek companies as well. For sure, tech companies in Greece are very well positioned to become targets of M&A transactions. There are private equity funds out there. There's a lot of money coming into the Greek tech ecosystem for companies to grow and to become ECG compliant and to gain those infrastructures that are necessary for them to become of interest for global acquisition players. Now, as regards the GC's role, and again, in my personal experience, they should be on the driver's seat, right? I mean, we've been talking a lot about the GCs being part of the business. They need to be a business partner. They need to understand exactly the way the company is going. They need to create the right infrastructure in place to set it up for success. They are now going through a very, very difficult and complex due diligence process, which requires to have the house in order, right? You cannot just wait for the due diligence process to create the infrastructure. You need proactively to create all those steps that are necessary for the business to thrive and for the business to be responsive during the due diligence process. Due diligence is very time sensitive. It has a lot of different requirements. And now with ECG and privacy compliance in place, I can tell you that the bet is high. You need to have done your homework before you get to the stage of being acquired. So again, GCs, be part of the business, listen to where where your business is going, and do create the infrastructure in place for you to be ready when the time comes.
Absolutely. This seems to be reinforcing again the centrality of the in-house counsel and how important of a role they play. This is something we have seen again and again with people that we speak to within the industry, especially with regards to ESG, but also I'm very happy to hear this also apply to M&A in Greece. So that's a very good indication. And another thing I was struck by was that given the centrality of the in-house counsel and the M&A process, we used to talk a lot about the process during the M&A, but with regards to the aftermath, that is often overlooked, if I'm correct. Please feel free to share your thoughts on this. If there's something you would like to flag up to other in-house counsel or to private practice.
So, thank you for that question, Chris. And I have to say that admittedly, I was very, very lucky to be part of a transaction with the Microsoft transaction that involved Softomotive. And I saw both sides of the story. So I was part of the M&A transaction until the closing. And then I was part of the integration phase as well. And being part of the integration phase has its own challenges as well, right? I mean, you have to go through all your contracts. You need to be able to see which of these can you terminate, which of these can you transfer, how do you transfer employees, how do you change their culture, how do you do that in a way that does not create risk for the company that has been acquired, because you do not want to create any additional liabilities, and at the same time try to integrate into something that's completely new to you. You have no idea how it's working. It's a different cultural environment. It has different rules and different corporate governance. As a general legal counsel, you need to speak to many, many different stakeholders within businesses, particularly if you're talking about a large corporation that's usually very siloed with many different stakeholders that do not necessarily talk to each other. So you need to be able to navigate the waters very, very easily to ensure a successful integration. And integration, to be honest with you, I would think that it's 80% of the success of an M&A transaction, because if you do the acquisition and then integration fails, what have you done? You haven't achieved really much in essence. So integration is key. Those GCs that do stay on board, they have to do a lot of work. It does take a lot of work. It takes 6 months to a year to ensure a full integration. And it could be challenging at times. But again, if you do have your house in order in the pre-acquisition phase, integration would be rather not easy, but at least not so challenging as you would expect.
Great.
I could also comment on that, and Catherine is absolutely right. Perhaps for CG, the JC is even more important, the integration phase, because you need to make sure that the business is not interrupted. So you need to have everything in place, that business goes on as usual. However, everything is not usual anymore, and it's a very, very interesting balance there to keep. I would also like to bring out another issue that we tend to forget when we speak about M&As. It's also the competition authorities, because in many cases, a lot of the M&As are subject to competition authorities' approvals. And sometimes I think, and Pavlos can actually tell us about that, more often than before, we see now what we call commitments on behalf of the companies that undergo these processes. And these commitments tend to follow you after the closing of the deal. And that means that for a number of years following the merger or the acquisition, you will have to work with certain commitments that you have made during the approval period, and it is for the GC to make sure that all the involved parties within the company and within the new entity understand what each of these commitments means for them and for their specific position, and then to actually make sure that they're complied with. And of course, there is an ongoing discussion with the competition authorities of how everything is being implemented and that everything goes according to the plan. And this is a lot of work, and it needs a very good organization on behalf of the GC, also internally in the company, and of course externally with the competition authorities and so forth.
Fantastic. Thank you both for sharing That's very illuminating indeed. So moving forward, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about looking ahead into 2022 and the challenges that are likely to arise and the opportunities that are likely to come across us. So if you could each just share a tip or suggestion or a piece of advice with our audience for what we can do to prepare both for the challenges and to make sure that we don't miss the opportunities that 2022 is likely to bring our way, to the extent that we can predict such things, both from a private practice and from an in-house perspective.
Yeah, well, Chris, if I may, I would like to lever on something that Catherine already raised, getting your house in order. There is a striking difference between Greek M&A practice and M&A practice elsewhere, particularly in Western Europe and North America, in that there is a different animal altogether that is known as vendor's due diligence. And this is relatively, if not greatly, unexplored in Greece. If you want to put yourself up for sale in the coming future, it is worth considering as a GC assigning to outside counsel a vendor's due diligence. You need to understand what are the likely issues that are going to arise in the framework of an M&A process. So I'm not saying that on a clear day without any plans forward to put yourself up for sale, you should engage a law firm to perform a vendor's due diligence. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if the management is exploring opportunities, for instance, it has already started discussing with investment bankers what the options are, it may be worth commencing a vendor's due diligence. If the negotiation process starts, if the legal due diligence process starts, the buyer's legal due diligence, there is no time to remedy issues that may be spotted by counsel to buyer. And quite often, the issues that are being spotted by buyer's counsel are non-remediable and may be deal breakers. So what Catherine said, getting your house in order is immensely important. I see that there is a generation shift in the in-house counsels for Greek corporates. More and more you see people that have at some point in the past dealt with an M&A or an attempted buyout. That was not the norm with very many, especially medium-sized Greek corporations in the past. They were mostly dealing with litigation, commercial contracts, employment law disputes. That's what was on their daily agenda. But now you see people that at some point in the past have had their hands on a buyout or an attempted buyout. So we now have people that have the sophistication to do this. And if there is budget within the legal department, it may be worth conducting a vendor's due diligence before the letter of intent or a term sheet is signed, before it comes your way, because then there might not be time to remedy the issue spotted. So that, I think, if there's something that we need to prepare for 2022, and if M&A activity remains at the levels that is during 2021, that it's definitely worth considering.
And to Pavlos' point, and this is an excellent point, Pavlos, but other than that, I would say that you have to act as if, right? You have to create the infrastructure in place within the beginning, like as soon as you get involved as a GC, you do your own due diligence. That's what I did, right? When I joined Softomotive as their GC, I made sure that I had a due diligence list in order, effectively, to see where are my contracts? What do my clauses look like? Do I have exclusivity clauses? Do I have non-compete? Do I have licensing terms that are weird? Do I have escrow arrangements? What does my IP protection look like? Do I have indemnities and liabilities in place that could, freak out a potential buyer? Do I have the ability to do a change of control or do assign my contract to an affiliate or to a buyer? So all of that, plus your ECG compliance, plus your data privacy compliance, your employee compliance, and now your D&I compliance is really the framework in which you need to be operating as a GC of the present time, so as to ensure that at any given point in time, if you become a target, you're ready for it. Because as Pablo says, there is really no time to be compliant at that stage.
Indeed. And I wanted to check that if there are any concluding remarks from Jota or Argyris from your respective perspectives on what we've already heard. We don't seem to have any comments. Oh, Jota?
Well, I can very, very briefly say that 2022 is going to be a very interesting year. I think the presentation that Pavlos has shown to us in the beginning suggests that we are to expect quite a few interesting movements in the Greek market. And I think we should all be prepared for that. And I think that the Greek economy has been prepared for that. I think the Greek economy was prepared already in the beginning of 2020, which was a good year. It was the year when the Greek economy started to come out from the crisis, and there was a huge appetite in the market for growth. And this has been put on hold. So I think now that we are doing this very limited, let's say, exit steps from this pandemic, I think we're going to see the reintroduction of this appetite. That is.
Thank you very much, Jota. I, for one, I'm very happy to hear experts' opinions on things that actually empower our professionals that we work with, GCs or private practice. It's always nice to see that there are things that can be done in good time with due diligence that can make professionals realize that they are empowered and they have control over the course of their company or industry. So that's fantastic to hear. We seem to have a question that addresses whether or not this webinar can be accessed online, and it most certainly can. It will be added on our website over the next few days. So anything that anyone wishes to revisit, you're more than welcome to visit on our website to hear these experts speak again, which has been very illuminating for myself personally. I'm sure it's been beneficial for industry professionals as well. That's great to see. So at this point, if there's no more remarks, I think we can bring this fantastic webinar to a close. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your insights and your willingness to share your expertise in such a manner. I already feel like I've benefited a lot from getting acquainted with the landscape in an even better way. So with my thanks, we can leave it here. And thank you all very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Legal 500, and of course, thank you, Pavlos Masouros and Masouros and Partners.
Thank you on my side as well. I hope to see you again sooner and not later. Okay.
Thank you all for accepting the invitation, and we're hoping that in 2022 there will be a live session that will be broadcasted. So we're already working on this, and it will be great to see you all in person.
The most interesting thing, Pablo, would be to see how close we were in our forecasts.
True, this is true.
Absolutely, absolutely. So once again, thank you all very much and have a great day going forward.